He who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby become a monster. And if you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you. This powerful quote from Beyond Good and Evil sets the stage for the provocative philosophy hidden within this work. Just to be clear, we're not talking about the Xbox and PlayStation game from 2003, but Friedrich Nietzsche's infamous classic published in 1886. Beyond Good and Evil is often hailed as Nietzsche's most dangerous book, pushing the boundaries of philosophical thought and inquiry. Nietzsche's aim in writing this book was in essence to provide us with a critique of modernity, including modern science, art, politics, culture, and most of all, the values they spawned. For Nietzsche, good and evil are the values that define the morality of the modern world, and more specifically, modern Europe, and of Christianity, the religion that serves as the instigator for these values. Though Nietzsche famously declared that Christianity was a form of slave morality, the bigger question he tries to answer is, what are values as such? How do we come by them? How do they show up in human behavior, in the art we create, in the science we produce, and even in the way we engage in philosophy itself? And if we no longer uphold these values, which values lie beyond? Which ones can replace them? Of course, it must be said that Nietzsche was certainly not the first philosopher to ask these questions, but Nietzsche takes things a step further by asking questions as, is suffering really a bad thing? Is compassion truly a good thing? Is seeking power bad? Is truth good? And most importantly, when we go beyond morality, where does that leave the individual? Although these questions are not original to only this book of Nietzsche, in Beyond Good and Evil they get his deepest and most penetrating attention. In this video, we'll explore the core ideas presented in this profound work. Just a quick disclaimer though. While this video is by no means a substitute for reading the book nor a complete summary, it aims to spark your curiosity and perhaps even give you the courage to read this masterpiece written by the Doctor of Nihilism yourself. So without further ado, let's get started. The Perils of Truth. Nietzsche often challenges our conventional understanding of truth, making it a more complex concept than we're normally used to. At the beginning of Beyond Good and Evil, he addresses philosophers directly, aiming to expose their biases. He introduces the idea of the will to truth. But what does this mean? If you wouldn't know better, at first glance it might seem like just a desire to discover the truth. However, by using the term will, similar to Schopenhauer's will to life, Nietzsche suggests it's an underlying drive that influences us without our rational consideration or choice. For Nietzsche, philosophers have an unquestioned belief that seeking the truth is inherently good. But why do we think it's better to pursue and know the truth than to hold a false belief? Why not seek untruths instead? After all, Nietzsche argues, sometimes a false opinion or judgment can actually preserve and enhance our lives more than a true one. The real question would be something more in spirit of, what is the value of truth for life? Does it help us survive, flourish, and improve ourselves? Some interpreters of Nietzsche's work claim that he is questioning the very notion of truth, as though we cannot ever describe anything as being true. This is an interesting statement, however, it might not be entirely correct. It's not that there is no such thing as judgments being true or false, according to Nietzsche. Rather, it's that false ones can be more valuable than true ones. We might be better off believing things that are false and not finding out that they are false. A finely nuanced example from Nietzsche himself is the case of religious belief. Religion used to give people a direction in life, a sense of meaning and purpose. When they wholeheartedly believed in traditional dogmas, God was their truth. Did it matter that their belief was false? European culture, which developed alongside Christianity, placed a high value on truthfulness. This eventually led to a scientific revolution that sought truth at any cost, ultimately shattering the illusion of God. Unfortunately, this brought about nihilism, the belief that there are no real values, leading to a bleak and directionless view of the world. In this way, the relentless pursuit of truth made our world seem more depressing. However, Nietzsche himself was not a nihilist. Instead, he saw himself as diagnosing nihilism, hence his nickname as the infamous Doctor of Nihilism, which he viewed as a modern plague affecting us all. He believed that from the destruction of the old value system, we have a chance to create a new kind of optimism. Recognizing how deep our nihilism goes is just the very first step. More importantly, it opens up the opportunity to develop a new, positive appreciation for life. Regarding the pursuit of truth, Nietzsche was very skeptical about its supposed purity. He argued that humans are not naturally driven to seek knowledge for its own sake. Instead, other underlying drives influence our activities. According to Nietzsche, every great philosophy is essentially a reflection of its creator's inner life, a kind of unconscious autobiography. He believed that the moral or immoral core of every philosophy is the true driving force behind it. Morality and the self. Having launched his radical critique of truth and other philosophers, Nietzsche now turns to something more fundamental, the self. Western philosophy has long adhered to a traditional notion of the soul, envisioning it as a single, unitary entity. René Descartes famously declared his existence by asserting, "I think, therefore I am." Believing this act of thinking confirmed his identity as the thinker. Nietzsche, however, disputes this. He argues that the I is a mere fiction. Grammar deceptively separates the process of thinking from the subject performing it, creating the illusion of a distinct thinker. But the sensation of a unified stable self is merely an illusion. Nietzsche posits that consciousness is a flawed guide to our inner workings. He suggests that our minds are a battleground for multiple sub-personal processes, drives and instincts locked in an internal struggle for dominance. Our conscious thoughts and what we perceive as our will are merely the visible outcomes of these subconscious battles that only surface after the fact. Nietzsche denies the existence of a pure free will. Although it may seem that we are stable, enduring selves with absolute control over our actions, this notion equates to being a causa sui, a cause of oneself, which is inherently contradictory. The traditional idea of an absolute free will, an ability to choose unaffected by any causal influences, is for Nietzsche part of the moral framework he seeks to dismantle. Viewing someone as evil or good implies they are entirely responsible and thus fully blameworthy for their actions and character. Nietzsche challenges this view. Conversely, there is something equally flawed in claiming that everything except oneself is to blame for one's actions. Nietzsche's crucial question probes deeper. What does it reveal about your fundamental drives that you cling to one extreme or the other? Do you believe you are in total control? Or do you see yourself as merely a product of your environment? Nietzsche often speaks of moralities to highlight how different cultures have lived by distinct sets of values throughout history. He is deeply interested in these variations and how one set of values can gradually replace another over time. When Nietzsche uses the term morality in the singular, he usually refers to a specific set of values that currently dominates modern Western culture. By juxtaposing this with other moralities, Nietzsche underscores that our conception of values is not carved in stone, and may not necessarily serve the best interests of humanity in the long run. The particular morality that Nietzsche critiques elevates compassion as its central virtue, encapsulated by the maxim that he borrows from Schopenhauer: harm no one, but help everyone as much as you can. This moral framework urges us to treat all people equally, and insists on an absolute obligation to shield others from suffering. In Nietzsche's view, the idea of evil is intrinsically linked to this moral system. A person is labeled as evil when they impose their will on others and inflict unnecessary harm driven by selfish desires. Those who act in this way do so because they are stronger, and this is why they are seen as evil. In contrast, the person that is morally good within the system is labeled as not being evil, and is usually weaker. This weakness is what Nietzsche labels as slave morality, or the morality of the herd. He contrasts this against a pre-Christian set of values that he categorizes as master morality. Nietzsche draws a clear connection between the concept of a master morality and the idea of nobility. To be noble, in his view, is to embody strength, self-affirmation, and the ability to wield power both over oneself and others. The noble individual values traits like honesty and courage. They take pride in their distinctiveness, viewing themselves as inherently superior, with a sense of detachment and condescension towards those beneath them, a sentiment Nietzsche famously labels as the pathos of distance. In ancient societies, Nietzsche argues, the nobility had no doubts about their status as good. They naturally viewed themselves as paragons of health, strength, courage, and beauty. In contrast, they deemed the common masses, those lacking in power and prowess, as bad. But for Nietzsche, bad wasn't a moral judgment. It was a reflection of weakness, inefficiency, and an inability to command respect. It wasn't about right or wrong. It was about strength versus weakness, with bad simply signifying something inferior, something despised for its lack of excellence. But an even more important question, according to Nietzsche, is where our modern notion of evil originates from, particularly as a moral concept. Nietzsche contends that it emerged from the perspective of the weak and powerless, those who were subjugated, oppressed, and marginalized. Imagine, Nietzsche suggests, what kind of morality would arise if it were shaped by those who had been crushed underfoot, the abused, the suffering, the uncertain, and the downtrodden. Naturally, such a morality would harbor resentment towards the powerful and self-assured. The very qualities that the masters celebrated, self-esteem, confidence, and dominance, would be seen as harmful, even evil. This historical transformation in values took root deeply in European culture, shaped by centuries of Christian influence, which championed a morality designed to protect the masses, the herd. Over time, this slave morality became so pervasive that it now appears to be the only valid moral framework. Nietzsche laments that this shift has obscured other possible ways of valuing the world, reducing the complexity of human values to a single dominant narrative. Which brings us to the following. Beyond religion, the power of suffering. Nietzsche uses a concept that can be best translated as suffering with. In English, we might call it pity, compassion, or sympathy. This idea was central to Schopenhauer's philosophy of morality. Since all living beings suffer, the highest moral instinct, according to Schopenhauer, is to feel for others and work to relieve their pain. But Nietzsche wasn't a fan of this idea. He saw this obsession with sympathy not just in Schopenhauer, but also deeply ingrained in Christian teachings, and even in modern moral theories. So what's wrong with feeling compassion for others? Isn't it a good thing to help people who are suffering? Well, Nietzsche digs deeper. He suggests that sometimes what looks like compassion is actually self-serving. Think about it. Helping others can make you feel better about yourself, right? It can even give you a sense of superiority over those you're helping. In a twisted way, the people you're saving can become your victims. It's a hidden power play, almost as manipulative as cruelty itself. As Charles Darwin once pointed out, it is not sympathy as such, but rather the ability to imagine ourselves in the position of another that drives us to act. To put it another way, sympathy is based on the capacity to imagine someone else's experience as if it were our own. This capacity is essential to the social behavior of human beings, for it motivates us to come to the aid of others in distress. But although it is rooted in empathy, sympathy does not automatically produce a desire to help. It can also produce a desire to avoid the pain of others, to turn away from them, or even to ignore them altogether. We may feel sympathy for someone, but at the same time we may feel powerless to help them, or we may simply not want to become involved. The tendency to turn away from suffering is perhaps most evident in those who are closest to us. We may feel sympathy for a friend who is going through a difficult time, but we may also feel overwhelmed by their suffering, or we may simply not know how to help. In such cases, it is often easier to turn away, to distance ourselves from their pain. But Nietzsche's main beef isn't with sympathy in general. It's with the moral belief that eliminating suffering is the ultimate goal. For Nietzsche, this is a huge problem because it treats humans like fragile beings whose only purpose is to be safe and comfortable. And if that's all we care about, we end up with a life that's flat and dull. No risks, no adventure, no growth, either for individuals or society. In typical Nietzsche fashion, he turns this idea on its head. Nietzsche's sympathy lies not with our desire to escape suffering, but with the parts of us that seek power, creativity, and greatness. Those things come with struggle and pain. So if we make the absence of suffering our highest goal, we risk killing off the very forces that drive human nobility and achievement. Suffering is a vital part of growth, a stepping stone to greater achievements. As he famously put it later in Twilight of the Idols, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. More controversially, Nietzsche also believed that humans naturally feel a sense of power when they cause or witness suffering. Whether we like it or not, he argued that this is just part of human nature. And while modern society cringes at this idea, hiding behind moral assumptions, Nietzsche challenges us to confront this uncomfortable truth. If we could stop flinching at the sight of suffering, according to Nietzsche, we might unlock humanity's true potential. But here's the catch. Nietzsche's ideas, especially about the value of suffering, can be dangerously easy to misinterpret. He embraces the label dangerous philosophy, but he might not have fully anticipated how his thoughts could be twisted for destructive purposes. Turning suffering into a path to greatness sounds noble, but in the wrong hands, it could be used to justify some pretty dark things. Maybe that's a topic for another video. But Nietzsche's critique doesn't stop here. His famous declaration that God is dead follows the claim that we have killed him. For Nietzsche, atheism wasn't something to argue for, it was just a reality of the modern world. By his time, belief in God had lost its grip, discredited and no longer serving any real purpose. Yet that doesn't mean Nietzsche saw religion as irrelevant. In fact, he was equally critical of modernity's indifference to it. He viewed society's obsession with pleasure as shallow, distracting from deeper reflections on higher values. It wasn't religion itself that Nietzsche opposed. He admired how the ancient Greeks used their gods to personify noble qualities, and found something powerful in the Jewish Old Testament's reflection of a confident people. What he found grotesque, however, was Christianity. In his signature fiery rhetoric, he claimed that Christianity had spent the last 18 centuries trying to turn humanity into a sublime abortion, creating a dwarfed, almost ludicrous species. Christianity, in his eyes, was the ultimate expression of slave morality, where weakness became virtue. Even though belief in God may be on the decline, Nietzsche warned that the values driving Christianity were still very much alive, and they were holding Europe back from reaching its true potential. What he believed was needed was a new inversion of values. Nietzsche took aim at Christian morality's core, the belief in an all-powerful God that gave authority to rules like suppressing your desires, avoiding creative expression, and becoming meek and harmless. He called this a religious neurosis, where natural human impulses were labeled sinful and needed to be crushed. Nietzsche saw this as a psychological illness, a powerful soul turning its energy inward, against itself. While some of Nietzsche's critiques may resonate today, especially in a world that has shifted its views on morality and psychological health, he warned that simply losing belief in God wouldn't free us from these ingrained moral imperatives. The real challenge, he argued, wasn't just moving past religion, but questioning the very nature of values, truth, and even the self. In order to truly break free, we would need to rethink the way we approach philosophy itself. A philosophy of the future. Nietzsche's vision for the philosophy of the future challenges us to rethink everything we assume about morality, truth, and human nature. As he outlines in Beyond Good and Evil, what is needed is a departure from the metaphysical dualities of good and evil, truth and falsity, higher and lower, that have shaped Western thought for centuries. Nietzsche's goal is to expose the limitations of the old moral systems, which were deeply influenced by Christian and Platonic ideals, and replace them with values that reflect a more honest engagement with life as it is. By urging us to go beyond good and evil, Nietzsche calls for a reevaluation of all values. This isn't about rejecting morality altogether, but about moving beyond the static binary systems of right and wrong, towards a dynamic, evolving understanding of the human condition. Nietzsche's vision of the philosophy of the future offers us the possibility of liberation, a chance to create new values that affirm life in all its complexity and unpredictability. But with this freedom comes responsibility. We must have the courage to face reality without retreating into comforting illusions, and to embrace the chaos and conflict that come with it. This is the challenge and the promise that Nietzsche lays out in Beyond Good and Evil. A philosophy that dares us to live more dangerously, more creatively, and ultimately more authentically. We have reached the end of our video on Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. Once again, please be aware that this video offers just a glimpse into the depth and complexity of the book. There's so much more to explore in this masterpiece, but hopefully we have sparked your curiosity and inspired you to delve further into Nietzsche's provocative work. If you're interested in picking up a copy, we've got links in the description to get you started. And if you are craving for more philosophy, and specifically more Nietzsche, check out our video on Thus Spoke Zarathustra. The link is in the description as well. And last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, drop a comment below sharing your thoughts, and hit that subscribe button. It really helps us out and keeps the channel growing. And if you want to support our work directly, check out our Ko-fi page. It is also linked below. Every contribution, no matter how small, helps us continue making content like this. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care.